to our third video on how to outfight the enemy. Some of you might be wondering, and as you're watching this, hey, where do we get a lot of these concepts and these principles? I want to show you real quick 3 key references that we use. The first is Robert Leonard's book, Art of Maneuver. The second is Tactics, the Marine Corps Doctrine Publication 1.3, written around 1993. And the third is Richard Simpkins' Race to the Swift. There's several others, but these are the 3 things we reference the most. So if you want more information, you want to read more about what we're talking about here, this is a good place to start. So if you remember in the first video, we talked earlier about how to outthink the enemy. And you do that by putting yourself, putting his hat on, putting yourself in his shoes, and trying to think about how he would do it. And then that would help you, construct your plan of how you would defeat it. And then you use your reconnaissance really to go out and hunt, to find the enemy and also find where he's not. Then use deduction that helps you figure out the enemy's intentions. Now once you find the enemy, that puts you into our next video, outmaneuver them. We talked about how speed kills. It really is being faster than the enemy and taking advantage of John Boyd's OODA loop to observe, orient, decide, and act and get into his decision-making cycle and race to a position advantage. We talked about there's 3 types of flanks. That, there's the geographic flank, there is the time flank, and the psychological flank. And really those, if you take advantage of those 3 flanks and get either in his, beside him or in his rear area, that puts you in a position advantage. Okay, so once you've found the enemy and you've raced to a position advantage in his flank or his rear area, now it's time to outfight him. Now, so how do you do that? Well, there's 3 key principles that I'm going to talk about and how you outfight the enemy to win in close combat. So the first one is combined arms, or we call the dilemma principle. Now, a lot of you, if you've been in the Army, sometime they talk combined arms. You hear it so much that it starts to lose any impact. So a lot of times in the big Army, growing up, when I hear combined arms, we talk that it's the armor and the infantry and the engineers and the aircraft all kind of working together. But there's more than that. It's the way they work together. And it's the way it is to put them into a principle, or really what you'll hear is, if you'll just kind of the term, the horns of a dilemma. The horns of a dilemma means if you do this, you lose, but if you do this, you also lose. So let me speak more about that. So when you put the enemy in a dilemma, you use combined arms to put the enemy into a dilemma. And if you think about a fire team, it's set up perfectly for that purpose. So imagine you as the enemy's moving along, and think about a fire team. You have your team leader, who and then he was the leader. Then you've got your saw gunner, who's a machine gunner. Then you have your 320 grenadier, and then your rifleman, who either provides security or will carry an anti-tank capability. So this fire team, the way they're arrayed is to use combined arms in such a fashion that puts the enemy always in a dilemma. If they do this, they lose, and they do that, they lose. For example, this fire team sees enemy infantry approaching. The first thing they're going to do is the saw gunner is going to engage with direct fire. Now, if he hits them, then that's that. But if not, the enemy will immediately jump behind cover and get to a position where no more direct fire will hit him. Now, knowing that, the 320 gunner then uses his grenades and launches them in such a fashion that it keeps them, if he gets down in that covered position, the grenades land in there and it blows out. So that puts the enemy in a position. If he stays in his covered position, he's going to lose. He'll be blown out by his 320 grenadier. If he stands up, the direct fire will shoot and cut him down. So either way, he loses. He gets down, he loses. He stands up, he loses. But then, for whatever reason, he calls forward an armored vehicle. Then you have your other infantryman with an anti-armor capability who destroys the armor. And so that is kind of like what we talk about, horns of a dilemma, and using combined arms to put the enemy, no matter what he does, he loses. And you look at our formation, we're set up that way, but most often people don't think that way. They all just shoot. You'll see in a lot of fire team, live fires and squad, everyone just engages direct fire. There's no real planning, no real consideration to use combined arms to put the enemy in a dilemma. What's most important is just not everybody shooting, it's the sequence of it. It's the sequence, meaning once you engage with one weapon, the enemy will then take an action, and then you have another weapon system that will destroy them if they take that action. Then you also think through, okay, and then when that's happened, they will take a third action, and so on and so forth. It's not shooting all at once. It's actually plan out your fires in such a way, in sequence, that it always puts the enemy in a dilemma, that if they do this, they lose. If they do that, they lose. That is what the whole idea of combined arms is all about. Using your mortars in order to hit dead space. Using direct fire when people are standing up. Using anti-armor capability to keep that from happening, and so on and so forth, in sequence, in order. And that's the first part of how to outfight your enemy. All right, the second principle is the Alcinaeus principle. Now, what that is, as you think of Greek mythology, there's a story about when Hercules, when he was doing his 12 labors, and one of his labors was to go into another country and fight this giant. As Hercules went down there, he shot the giant with an arrow. The arrow, that giant falls over. But then he comes back alive, and Hercules could not, finish his labor. Unsure what to do, Athena later appears to him and tells him Alcinaeus cannot be killed in his own country. And so the secret is that he has to be killed in another country, or he has to be brought out of his home country into another. So Hercules goes back, he clubs the giant, knocks him over, picks him up, and pulls him out of his home country into Hercules' native country, and there he's able to defeat the giant. So what does that mean to us? It means that the second principle, using the Alcinaeus principle, means that there's ground in which every arms has its advantage. For example, there's tank country. Tank country, they love the rolling hills and wide open areas where they can use their direct fire, and places where they can come and defilade and out. That's where tanks like to fight. That's where they have the advantage in fighting. If the infantry try to fight the tanks in that kind of country, then they always lose. Whereas the infantry has country that we are most suited for. Dense forests, high mountains, urban terrain. And so the idea is not fighting the giant, infantry fighting tanks in tank country, but to figure out how to draw the tanks into infantry country. And if you're a tanker, how to draw the infantry into tank country. So knowing that, as you set up this fight right here, when you get into the part where you hunt, race, and now you're ready to kill the enemy, is to do it in such a way that you're not fighting the giant in their country, and figure out how to pull the enemy into your own country. So as an infantry, we're always looking to fight in urban terrain, in a dense forest, at choke points where it takes advantage of our capabilities to get the enemy close and then get the giant out of their country. This really kind of goes into what we call asymmetry. So I've heard a lot of times through my career, they'll say tanks, you go to a lot of schoolhouse instructors like, well, tanks kill tanks, infantry kills infantry, artillery kills artillery. And right now the Army is in this fascination with, the counter battery fight and infantry fighting infantry and so on and so forth. That's not smart fighting. In fact, that's me fighting symmetrically. If you think about it, what really kills infantry? Artillery kills infantry. I mean, in World War I, 70% of those killed was killed through artillery fire. So it's not that infantry is meant to kill infantry, that's symmetrical fighting. It's using artillery and mortar fire to kill infantry. What destroys tanks? Well, symmetrically, you'd say, well, tank on tank. But that's not a smart way of fighting. The smart way of fighting is using infantry is what kills tanks, if you can get them in infantry country. What kills artillery? Well, infantry kills artillery. But again, it's not only just, it's understanding not fighting symmetrically, but it's also getting them in their country. So here at the Dark Rifles, what we are adamant about is we use our mortars to kill infantry. And we set that up to always get the infantry to separate the tanks from the infantry, use our mortars to kill infantry, and use our infantry to kill tanks. And that combination of both drawing them into infantry country and using asymmetry is how we outfight our enemy. The third principle is having an ambush mentality. And that is what we emphasize in our entire formation, is turn every situation into an ambush. The reason is again, we're always, as we talked about in a previous video, we're trying to induce shock upon the opponent. We're trying to induce shock upon the opponent. As we described, there's really only one principle of war, as William Slim said, is that to hit the other guy as hard as you can, as quick as you can, where it hurts him the most when he least expected. And if you try to set up your fight using that principle, you can really see that most of it hinges on having an ambush mentality. So turn everything into an ambush where the enemy is being hit from a direction they least expected, as with violent, overwhelming firepower, using combined arms, and asymmetry is how we outfight the enemy. So in summary, as we've gone through our outthink, outmaneuver, and outfight, this is where we come up with our philosophy of hunt, race, and kill. To outthink the enemy, you become a hunter. You think like he does, how he would fight, and you arrange your forces that way, and you really maximize your reconnaissance to discover his intentions. Once you figure out his intentions, his location, now it's a race to move faster than he does. Remember that speed kills. And then you get into his decision-making cycle, and then get to a position advantage, which most of the time is going to be on his flanks and his rear area. Or you try to operate in the time flank between that space of detection and when he is at his readiness. Once you get your position of advantage, then you outfight him using combined arms in such a way that puts the enemy on the horns of a dilemma, that no matter what, he loses. You draw him into infantry country. And using asymmetry, you use mortar fire to kill infantry or artillery fire to kill infantry, and infantry to kill tanks. And that combination really you're always fighting asymmetrically, and then using the Alsaeus principle. And lastly is always having an ambush mentality. In every situation, turn it into an ambush. And as you use those three principles, that's how we've found success in winning in close combat. Okay, hunt, race, kill.